I just wanted to introduce Mandy, and the reason why Visual Arts Southwest felt the need to have an opportunity to invite curators from across the region to have a discussion about practice and support building our kind of confidence and network and exchange of knowledge and ideas. And throughout this sort of period of time, we've been leading on a series of webinars for the region, but also kind of nationally as well. And a lot of the discussion always centres around artists' work, and I would like to see kind of more support networks actually for curators in, you know, myself kind of including that, because we, you know, being a skilled profession, it feels that there isn't enough kind of platforms for actually kind of that learning engagement going across. So we're hoping within our long-term plan to kind of build this more into our framework as we move forward with Visual Arts Southwest. So like most people who are independent and as an organisation, we've been in a bit of a, you know, hiatus period of time as well, but we feel like we're kind of getting the message out there to at least create a framework that supports you all in feeling and understanding kind of what's going on in the world, and that just enables these conversations to happen. So Mandy is a curator, a consultant that I followed for a very long time, and just in the last recent few months kind of got to know more as a direct colleague. I see often enough colleagues actually kind of talking about Mandy and the support that she gives to individual practitioners. So I wanted to kind of enable this conversation for a collective group. And my hoping is with the collective group is that we have an opportunity to take forward the conversations that we have here and then broaden that out to encompass more people as well. So we actually could make a kind of, you know, a curatorial network within, you know, the encompassing of the Visual Arts Southwest kind of support that we can give as well. So handing over to you, Mandy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to see everyone and see some faces that I know. I have met in real life previously. Some names that I know, but we've never actually met in person, I know for certain, and some new names and faces to me. So it's really great to see you, everyone. As Nella mentioned, we've got the cameras on, for those of you that are comfortable with that. And I wanted to do that because I wanted this to be quite an informal discussion, really. And I want you to participate. So we've also got the chat function on and also the raise hand function as well. Because what I want is for this to be quite a discursive platform. So as I'm talking you through various aspects, I want you to join in and ask questions. And you can do that either by indicating in the chat or putting up your virtual hand. Does everybody know how that kind of works? I can see one up already. Kate Best has got her hand up already. That deliberate? Oh, down now. So yeah, and then between Nella and I will keep an eye on that and invite you in to have that sort of, you know, bring your point to us, that discursive point. We've also allocated some time at the end as well for some more in-depth questions too. Normally I would do this kind of session as a workshop really, which is why I wanted to have that kind of, you know, workshop type of functionality switched on so we can kind of talk as we go along. Thank you very much, Paula, for inviting me to do this. And as you talk about, I do support a lot of individuals. I feel that I feel very passionate about that as an independent consultant, producer, curator, that it's really important to have discussions with people all of the time and to support other people as well all of the time as well. We're all out there doing this, we're all working in the same sector, and I think the more we can support each other the better. And I've worked on a freelance basis now for 8 years, yeah, 8 years, and before that ran a very small organisation. So again, that's something that I've always sort of shared knowledge and shared skills and had conversations with people all the way through. And I think when I first started working on an independent basis, I was incredibly fortunate enough to have received some mentoring from a couple of people who really, really helped me on my journey and have become colleagues and peers now. And I sort of check in with from time to time. Still, we have that relationship. And say we work together as colleagues as well. So I'm very passionate about that. I'm very passionate about paying forward, you know, the kind of helping other people out. So yeah, please do join in as we go along. I just wanted to start off by talking about how, you know, we are in very tough times for our sector at large going forward. Right now and also going forward. You know, the government's emergency packages are by no means going to sort out the situation for everyone, and there will be tough decisions made as we go forward. So I think that's really important to bear in mind in the kind of context of the conversation that we're having today. And I think especially for those who are in more precarious positions of working, so those people that do work on a freelance basis, those people who work in organisations that don't receive regular funding, but even those organisations that do receive regular funding are having to make tough decisions. You know, they've got budgetary decisions in front of them to be making as well. So it's across the board, and a lot of what I'm going to say today I think is applicable across various scenarios as well, but particularly I'm focusing in on that kind of those that work on a freelance independent basis. As I know the majority of you, from the response that you gave to the survey, are in that position, the majority of people today. I think I work on a freelance basis. As I said, I've been doing that for 8 years, and like you know, I'm facing these tough times too. I've had one piece of work cancelled completely because the programme that's connected to has been cancelled completely, and that organisation is facing very tough times at the moment as well. Initially that piece of work was put on hold and then it got cancelled completely. There are other things that I've had put on hold and have come back in, and there's also new pieces of work as well, and I've had to adapt various pieces of work as well to the new world of this online platform as we're all having to do at the moment. So we'll be talking through some of that and how that kind of happens as well. I think also the new work that's come in has been quite responsive as well to kind of the situation that we're in and new ways of working too. So we'll sort of pick up on that, and a lot of that's connected to kind of relevance. So we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go along. So say thank you for those that filled in the survey. I think the majority of you filled in the survey in advance. What I wanted this to do, as we talk about responsiveness and relevance, I wanted this session to be very much responsive to the situation that you're in currently. So I set those questions specifically to cover some very specific points that I wanted to then pick up on today. From that survey, to say the majority of you filled it in, you showed that 63% of you are worried about work in the future. So you're not on your own, those of you that feel that, you know, it might be just unique to you. And 69% of you showed that you work, as part of your role, the work that you do requires you to find partners and artists to work with as well. And within that, you all scored yourself quite low in how well networked you feel that you are. I split that into kind of various categories, and you all scored yourselves very low across the board, but particularly outside of the Southwest as well. So I wanted to pick up on that particularly today. You also scored yourself quite low in terms of your confidence to approach new partners and artists as well, and in your confidence to articulate the value of your work. So what I wanted to do is respond to those three things in particular and pick up on that as we talk through today. So I'm going to focus on the three key areas, which is mapping your networks and identifying your networks, the gaps that you've got and how to fill those gaps, and how to do that in the new world of online as well. So that is very much new territory for all of us. So certainly kind of ideas, please throw them out as we discuss that. I want to then look at mining that network, the networks that you've already got, for opportunities, for work opportunities, and for finding other opportunities as well. So we'll talk about that as we go through those opportunities that are existing, and then those that might be potential opportunities in the future as well. And then the third thing I want to focus on is how to articulate relevance in conversations and in writing as well, which is all about those kind of making those opportunities happen in that respect. And again, I want to talk about that in terms of online and in real life, face to face as well, and in writing. So those three are seemingly different platforms, but actually they all use the same principles, which we'll talk about. So again, this new online world is completely new to all of us. So please join in with that and your ideas around that, especially. I think what I wanted to really start off with talking about, what I call the 3 R's of how we work. And I think these are really, really relevant now. So those 3 R's are responsiveness, resilience, and relevance. And I think those 3 things are key to particularly working in an independent basis, but especially to how organizations need to be as well at all times, but particularly now at this point that we're at. And all 3 of those are completely interlinked as well. I think now is also a time for us as individual practitioners, but also for organizations, to spend some time reflecting and also invest in yourself as well. We have these points, I think, in our career trajectories where we need to have a moment to reflect, and also that kind of investment in ourselves as well, to really think about what it is that we're doing. And we'll talk through that a little bit more about what our skill sets are, and also the relevance of what we're doing, and that kind of resilience, how do we kind of bounce back into this new world. I think also there's something I've been trying to articulate about working in our particular sector, and I don't think it is unique to our particular sector at all. And someone recently summed it up, and I'm going to just talk about what they said around this. Now, that person, it's the best kind of summing up of this that I found, is David Olusoga, who actually, lives in Bristol in the southwest. And no doubt, you've seen how much TV coverage he's getting at the moment. I mean, you've got to a point where you can barely turn on the TV and see David Olusoga. Now, I'm a big fan of David's work, and I've actually managed to work with him a couple of times as well in the past. And recently, the way in which he summed this up was, as no doubt he's a professor of history at Manchester University. And there was a conversation that he had, his lectures being online, and there was a student interviewing him on the Manchester University website. And they were asking him about the longevity of his career, actually. And, if he had any advice for students, and if he had advice for his younger self as well. And he talked about, when you're passionate about one subject, and in his case, that's history, that you need to be able to come at it in multiple ways. And of course, if you look at what David does, for him, coming at history in multiple ways, he's a presenter. He produces his own TV programs, he gives lectures, he teaches, he's a writer, and he's also a journalist. But all of those things are all about history at the end of the day. For him, that's his passion. I think we all work within visual arts, that's our passion. And can we take some of that and come at things from multiple ways? And I think that is particularly around how we can remain responsive, relevant and resilient at the moment as well. So we'll talk about that a little bit more, and actually a practical kind of task around that as well. What I also wanted to kind of talk about within that is how we start with what we have as well, what we've got that that we currently have that we can kind of bring to that as well. So I've got a task in a moment that I want you to do sort of today, because it's going to make sense to kind of carry on into the task we've got coming after that. But one of the things I wanted you to sort of maybe take away from today and think about a little bit more within that, when I talk about that time now for us to reflect and invest in ourselves as well. And around that, starting with what you have, is thinking about your current skills and your knowledge. You know, what is it that I actually do? You know, what are my unique selling points in that respect? You know, your USP. And I think also, why is it that people work with us? And that's, you know, those that are work on an independent basis, but also those that work within organisations, as to your colleagues. You know, what is it you bring? And I think within that, you know, if you can't answer that yourselves very easily, you might have to kind of call upon those people you work with a little bit to just help you unpick that, because I'm sure that they will see things that maybe you don't necessarily see yourself. But just what is it that, you know, you're bringing as to why you're that person that people are working with? And I think spend some time reflecting on that, because I think within that there's a lot of things that we can open up for ourselves beyond that. Also, I think that leads into this point, which we're going to discuss a little bit more. You know, what is it that my clients, my colleagues, my organisations, my communities need from me right now at the moment? And that's about understanding their need. That kind of, yeah, will really help you, I think, with understanding what it is that you're bringing to that. Does anybody want to ask anything before we kind of shift on to the next chunk? Silence. Great. Okay. I think also one of the things we need to think about in this new world that we're existing in at the moment, in our communication form, is online. So kind of one of those really key things is kind of, is your online profile up to date? And think about how you kind of, where your online presence is, and make sure that that's kind of as up to date as it can be at the moment. So whether that's, you know, LinkedIn, your social media profiles, your website, think about how that is showing, you know, kind of all your skills in that respect. There's also, I think, once you've kind of had a look at that, had a look at your skills and understand what it is that you bring. Also identify, is there any gaps in that at the moment as well? And if there is, look at kind of how you can fill those gaps. So is there anything you feel that you're missing by way of your skills and also your knowledge bases? And, you know, think about how you could fill those at the moment. And is that, you know, do I require some training? Is it some reading I've got to go and do? Is it some kind of, you know, information gathering I've got to go and do? Is it some mentoring even that I require at this point as well to kind of help us through that? And then also I want you to think about, if you are using all of your current skills at the moment and your knowledge in your work as well. So we'll look at a bit of a mapping exercise in a moment, but think about that. So if you've identified all of your skill sets and your knowledge bases, are they all being put to use? And if not, kind of how can they be put to use? How can that my kind of what I've got at the moment that is not being used, kind of how can I then use that going forward as well? And I think about going back to that point that David Olusoga made, you know, what are the multiple ways in which I can work, I think is what we need to be asking ourselves at that point. You know, can I work with my full skill set, my knowledge and my resilience? Now I think as the term curator is kind of really interesting that we use. I mean, I use various titles. It's kind of curator, sometimes producer. I use consultant as a kind of catch-all. But I think there's multiple things that we do within that term of curator. So I think about that in terms of, you know, how else can that be being used? Is it curating, kind of producing, being a selector, writing, you know, supporting artists in other ways as well to help them realize projects, you know, be sounding boards, maybe a mentor for artists as well, or for others, and also the kind of, you know, supporting organizations in other ways as well with my skill set. So I think have a real think through your skill set. I can see someone's put up something in the chat. I'm just going to have a quick look. Lara, would be good to know who everyone is and their websites, LinkedIn, etc., for future partnerships. Lara's the curator the curator of contemporary art at the Royal Albert Memorial Museum. I think that's what RAMM stands for, isn't it, in Exeter. I was freelance for 10 years in Yorkshire, Hull, 2017 before that. You can find me on LinkedIn. Great. I think that's one of the things we're going to pick up actually as well, a kind of your peer network here. And again, that's one of the reasons why I wanted you to have your cameras on. Actually, in that point, I wonder if it's worth us, because I'm sure there's lots of people here that you don't all know each other. So it might be worth, I don't know if you all know this, on your image in the top right-hand corner under the 3 dots, you can rename yourself as well. So if you want to put in any more detail there by way of, you know, your full name, or your if you work for an organization, or if you're independent, that might be a bit useful to put in there. And in terms of that circulating kind of who's here, maybe Paula and Nella, is there a way of doing that after this session? We could circulate the details of who's here.
Maybe a nice way to do this could be, I've used this before, that everyone, if you happen to have a bio at hand, or like a quick few lines about yourself, you could drop it into the chat, and I can circulate the chat with everybody who was here today. So then everyone will have everyone's names and kind of the brief introduction to who that person is. That could be something we can try.
And also we can, you know, ask the question around GDPR if you want to share your email addresses as well. So then we can kind of do an exchange. So perhaps for those who would like their email address to be kind of sent around to the whole group, we can do that. And if you put that in the chat as well, does that make sense, Nella? Is that all right?
Sure. And then as another option, we can also leave the chat open for about 15 minutes afterwards. This is an idea, brilliant idea someone gave me after the last one. So then people can also chat privately after we wrap up if they've got time.
Super.
Great. Okay. Excellent. And I think that, Carolyn, you've also just popped something in about yourself there too. Great. Okay. Excellent. And yes, Lara, your point about this seems like a good place to network here too. Thanks. Completely. And actually that leads me perfectly into that next point. What I wanted to start to look at was your actual networks by way of, you know, what exists for you currently. So I have got a task for you to do here as well. And I know it's a bit tricky for us to kind of share the results of that in this sort of forum without spending a lot longer on it. But I want you to just grab a pen and paper and to do this task, because I think it will make sense as we go through to that kind of the next part of the kind of conversation here as well. So Nella, I wonder if you could possibly pop up the first slide for me, which we can circulate to everyone afterwards as well. So we're just going to share the screen.
Yeah, just let me know if it successfully shows up.
Great. Perfect. Great. So what I wanted you to do is to think about your networks, and in terms of your existing networks. And what I want you to do is draw on a piece of paper, however you want to do it, put you in the middle of this. I don't know if any of you have mapped your networks previously. There's sort of various ways of doing it, but this is the way that I tend to use. So put yourself in the center of your network, and then think about the types of people that are in your existing network, people you have access to and contact with already. And what I want you to do is just jot down names and then think about them in terms of these 5 groupings, because I think this is really kind of important as to how we connect with people. So within that, we've got peers, and so just drop a P next to their name, basically, in that respect. So peers, so those, like the people that are in the room here, who do you consider your peers to be that you have access to and contact with? And then there is, and I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to do this task in a second. I'm just going to talk you through this bit. Then we've got mentors. So someone that you feel you can ask for guidance, you can talk things through. You may have official mentors, unofficial mentors, but just that we categorize those people in terms of mentors. Then your current clients, so those that you work with. And I think even if you work within an organization, there are people that we would term as sort of your clients within that. So pop a C down next to those. And then your multipliers, that's people that put you in touch with other people that are interested in your work. So I've got those down as an M+ to be able to distinguish between the mentors and your multipliers. And then C+, I've got down here, champions, those people who champion your work. So does that make sense to everyone? Are you quite happy with sort of just having a couple of minutes to do that and think about those people in terms of your relationship with them? See everyone's heads down writing. How are we all doing? All got a couple of people down? Yeah, got some faces looking up. Does anybody want to share anything from just sort of going through that process? Oh, all silent. Oh, I think Prudence, are you talking? I can't quite.
Yeah, there are crossovers, aren't there?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, there are crossovers in your networks. Yeah. Anybody else? Vicky?
Yeah, I think a recurring crossover is clients and champions.
Yeah.
Really key for doing both.
Yeah. Yeah. So I suppose in that respect, is it kind of people referring you then for work in that respect? So it's your people that you have worked with, your current clients that have then championed you on for other work. Yeah. Great. Okay. Good. Okay, Paula?
Mine feels quite small.
Okay, that's all right. We're going to address that next. You've only had a couple of minutes to kind of, plot those down. I'm sure when you spend a little bit more time with it, you will think about that.
Even though I feel like I've got a vast network, but those who I'm directly working with, it feels very, very small, not limiting, but very small. And but it's utilizing those networks to kind of action them further, really. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, well, what I want you to do, not right now, but to do a little bit more work on that outside of this forum, and I want you to go back to that skills set and knowledge base exercise as well, and think about the people that you've identified within your network currently, from your skill set and your knowledge, kind of what is it that you're bringing in that respect. So you're mapping, that will help you to kind of identify, is your skill set being used kind of fully at the moment? Is my knowledge being used kind of fully? Or likewise, where those kind of, gaps are as well. So that you're really beginning to understand kind of what it is that you're bringing to the table for those people that you're working with as well. So to go back to Vicky, was it you made the point about your kind of champions and your clients quite often are the same. So what is it that kind of they are championing you for from your kind of current client base that you're working with them on? So what is it that they're referring you on for in that respect? And so it might be that you need to talk to some of these people actually as well to sort of unpick it a little bit more for you as well, if you're sort of struggling to identify it yourself. It's always really hard, isn't it? We're not very good in general at kind of, unpicking these things for ourselves. So you might well have to kind of broaden that conversation out a little bit to those people too. I think also the next task that I want you to, we can have a quick go at this now, which picks up on Paula's point actually as well, who thinks that it's kind of looking quite small. So the next bit to this is drawing an outer circle. So you've got your kind of inner circle of people in effect that you're kind of, are close to you, that do certain things for you in terms of your work. And then a kind of outer circle. What I want you to think about is looking at your current inner circle. Are there gaps in that? Put those in the outer circle. And I think also think about the diversity of your inner circle as well within that. And I don't mean that in terms of Arts Council's creative case for diversity. I mean in terms of diversity of people. Is it all coming from the same people? Or are there kind of, gaps that you've got and you don't have to identify individual names in that outer circle. It can be types as well. So sort of types of people that you've got missing. So if you've identified that you've got very few names under a certain point of those 5 categories, then kind of think about that a little bit more. And also, within that outer circle, think about where you want to be in the future as well. So think about that kind of, where are there potential opportunities for me in the future I feel currently, and obviously that's hard for us to identify completely at this point in time. Or is it, you know, an organization that you've always wanted to work with that you can then link up with later on down the line? Or have you got a goal that you want to end up working with someone, or with a particular organization, or a particular type of project? So I think if you can just spend just a couple of minutes sort of identifying some of that, it's just so you've got something to kind of work with. Okay, a couple of heads coming back up. Anybody got anything in particular they want to share from doing that? Anybody notice some obvious gaps that they've got? Carolyn?
I realise that my world has got smaller. I'm working much more local level than I used to before, but also the people I work with tend to be older, and I've been actively trying to connect with younger people. It's not so easy in a rural area, I have to say, but they're key, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else got anything from that? Vicky? Oh, Vicky and then Rosa. Got two hands up.
Yeah, something that's come up for me is that I feel like I've got a really strong network of kind of curator peers in the Southwest, but to be able to develop projects that perhaps might tour, I really don't have good connections with curators particularly in organisations elsewhere in the country, to be able to establish those kind of projects.
Yeah. Okay. Rosa?
Oh, I just think writing out like that makes me realise I do know the people who can help me get there, if that makes sense. And it's just funny not really putting them in that box, actually thinking of your peers and people that you've worked with who can help one get to the next stage. It's kind of useful to map them out like that.
Yeah, good. Anybody else got anything? Are you finding it a bit weird to think about people in this way? Zoe, you've got your hand up.
I realise it's very distinctive, that kind of mentor group. It's all outside the region, everywhere else, and everything else is within the region. So there's a kind of really distinctive gap in there.
Okay, good. Anybody else?
I think I'm probably the opposite of Zoe, in that I used to have a very formal structure. I mean, I used to have this very clearly plotted, fairly formalized way, I suppose, very clear peer networks, mentor, etc., working in a national institution. And then I moved out to the regions, and I haven't re-established that in a regional way.
Okay. Did anybody find that a bit strange as a kind of task to think about people in that way? Paula, you're waving.
Yeah, I think the same actually, Kate. Coming out of an institution, or having that kind of responsibility, even though my network's there, I suppose I always feel like I lend on my own resilience to kind of move things forward, and I know that's a critical thing when you're independent, and for those reasons why you probably are, I am independent as well. But it's kind of being in that position to kind of make that kind of ask of organizations to kind of think about my project in a way that they're talking to their peers and their networks, when I hopefully think and feel that my ideas are as valid as their institutional kind of networks and peers. So yeah.
Good. We'll pick up on that in a moment actually as well. So I think just to marry those two tasks together a little bit, we've just got another sort of 2 stages within this. So within that outer network that you've got, where you feel that there might be some opportunities for you or people you'd like to kind of connect with, I think to go back to your skills and knowledge identification, and where you've put that against people that are already in your network as well, you need to have a look at that in terms of your outer kind of network as well. So it's kind of, what could I bring in my skills and knowledge to those people, or that relationship, that organization, that however you've kind of termed those outer people in that respect. So you've got an idea of what it is that what you can bring to that, and what you see as your kind of fit in that respect. You've all got your heads down, instantly doing it. I mean, to do some of this, it'll take you, and as I say, that kind of, that time to reflect and that time to invest in yourself as well. So I'm not expecting you to do it kind of now. I'm just trying to give you those sort of tools to be able to, take that away and spend a little bit more time with in that respect. And then kind of the final part on your sort of network map is then to kind of, as somebody alluded to just now, in terms of that kind of connecting those people through, because quite often to those people we've identified in terms of our outer circle, we've got links to them already. So we've looked at kind of our skills and what we can bring to that, but we have actually quite often got links through to those people already. So to go back to Vicky, when you were talking about your champions, that's already obviously working for you, and you've got a bit of an understanding around that because you've identified people as your kind of champions. So there's an element of where that is already kind of falling for you, but then also there will be some of those other people that might not be obvious connectors for you through to some of those kind of other people in the outer network, in effect. And this is where I think that kind of, when I talk about that paying it forward element, I think the more that you understand how you do that for other people as well, the more you can feel comfortable with making the ask of those people to help kind of connect you through. We'll talk a little bit more in a moment about some of that and kind of relevance. But I think it's a really useful exercise to get that kind of understanding of how things work for you. So those of you that are within organizations as well, although it's kind of not, you're slightly different in terms of independent work, but you still got to find partners to work with and artists to work with as well. So it kind of works in that respect for you too. Okay. So those kind of future opportunities element that so many of you are worried about, there's sort of 63% of you that said that you're worried about opportunities in the future for your work as well. I think we need to, we'll talk about that a little bit more. So you've already got this kind of mapping going on within that, as to kind of look for that, and kind of looking at your own already existing networks as to where those opportunities might be. But it is about those kind of opportunities in terms of what those opportunities might actually be as well. So you've got the kind of the potential of the people, but it's kind of what is that sort of opportunity in that respect. I think that's about getting in the room to have the conversation with people. So there's multiple ways in which we can do that, and in this online world that's kind of extended massively in that respect. So I think, you know, kind of one of the silver linings of the way in which we're kind of having to work at the moment is that people are working online, and that's kind of where the conversation's happening. So there's also, people are having to put things up online in that respect, and that's, you know, for communication purposes. And so organizations in particular are kind of having to put out online content. There's a lot of social media dialogue going on as well. And, you know, whilst kind of social media has its downsides, actually I think it kind of works really well in this kind of current context. And that's what I was talking about earlier, your kind of online presence as well, and making sure that that's up to date as well, and that you're kind of joining in with the conversation as well. So people are also more available actually as well. In a moment when we talk about that kind of making the ask, you know, people aren't traveling like they were previously, so people are more readily available to be able to kind of connect in that respect as well, and to be able to open up those connections through to you as well. So I think also in terms of just that, before we go on to the kind of our next chunk about kind of relevance and that sort of how you make the ask, is to kind of go back to your network map and look at those kind of people that in your outer circle, and even those people that are kind of in your inner circle, and make sure that you're kind of connected in that digital space with those people as well. And that's really where you can kind of find out a lot of information that you're going to need in the future from that kind of online space, and in terms of the communications that are going on online at the moment. So I think that's kind of, you know, social media, the kind of webinar scenario as well. You know, are you kind of going to webinars? Are you, you know, quite often I've been to quite a few and you see the same people popping up again. I've extended my network hugely through this type of forum in that respect. And, you know, people that I've wanted to connect with previously, but I've never actually, you know, several of you whose names I know, but I've never actually met you in person. And we're kind of now in the same spaces in terms of the online world. So I think there's some of that as well that maybe you could kind of have a look at to make sure that you kind of have got those potential, you know, gateways open to kind of communication with those people too. And again, that kind of research element, we'll pick up on that again a little bit more in the next chunk as well. But also that kind of, you know, are you connected to them all online, following them on social media, got that kind of an understanding of what they're doing, where they're at this point in time. I think that's then also about how we then have those conversations with them, and those conversations that need to be relevant going forward. I think this is, you know, for organisations who need to be relevant. You know, it's something that keeps coming up in Arts Council's new strategy at the moment, is kind of relevance. So I want to unpick that a little bit more, by what we mean with that in that relevance aspect. I think in that case, Nella, can you just switch into the next slide, which I think is a quote from Susan Hiller. Yes, it is. There's the quote, and it refers to artists, but I think it's equally, we work with artists, but it's equally applicable to visual arts in general and in terms of what we do. So visual arts have a function where part of a conversation, it's our job to represent and mirror back the values of the culture in a way that people haven't seen before. Sorry, I was just moving everything off my screen so I could see that quote. And I think that really starts to kind of unpick some of that kind of relevance. What is it that we do? What is it that visual arts does by way of kind of relevance? And what is it that we do in terms of relevance as well? And I just want to pick that up a little bit more. Nella, if you could just move into the next slide. By what we mean about relevance. So relevance there, I looked up the dictionary definition of relevance earlier because I think it's something we talk about a lot at the moment, but kind of what do we actually mean by that? So the quality or state of being closely connected or appropriate is what the dictionary definition of relevance is. So I think in this context, what I'm going to talk a little bit more about is that how the relevance that we have as practitioners, and also what we mean by relevance in terms of the conversation that we're having as well. So I think relevance is very much about a relationship, in terms of the dictionary definition there saying closely connected or appropriate. So it's about that relationship, and it's about building that relationship and the transaction. So it's about that, in terms of that transaction, that existing in relation to something. So I think that, kind of taking that back to your network maps in that respect, it's that kind of, understanding what your relevance is currently in terms of those conversations, the relationship that you've got with each of those people that you've mapped out there, and understanding what that transaction is that's going on in terms of that by way of what you bring to that there. And it's very much about the art of the conversation. And I think the more you understand that, the more confidence that you will have in your relevance to that conversation as well, and knowing where you are relevant as well. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to talk about, I've got some points here that are applicable, I think, equally to the kind of, in the real life sense of that kind of relationship that we have with people, and then kind of the online space as well. And I want to talk through that a little bit more with you guys, because that's kind of quite, new territory for all of us as well. So in terms of understanding your relevance, I think this goes for kind of those potential new opportunities for you as well, and that kind of identification of those new opportunities for you as well. So this was kind of initially written from that perspective of when you get in the room with someone, whether that's a virtual room or you're having an online conversation or you're meeting that person in real life, it's about understanding where you fit in terms of relevance to them. So it's about the conversation that you're having and understanding what's going on in that conversation in that respect. So that element of, it's not all about you. It's not about you trying to tell them about your work. It's about listening and being what we call other conscious. So it's that kind of understanding what is going on for that other party in that transaction and how you're relevant to that in that respect. And to be able to do that, you need to be able to listen to understand how you're relevant to it, not assume a way in which you might be relevant to that. You can do lots of research around that and understand kind of where they're coming from. But actually, in terms of that conversation, what you're looking at is ways in which you can find the opener as to how you're relevant. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. So say that kind of research, there's that way in which you can kind of do that research around that organisation or that person or that a grant fund even, this relates to also, in terms of, you know, kind of what is it that they're really, what are they doing, what are they really looking for within this, what are their kind of, what's happened for them previously, what's the kind of specialisms, what's the kind of, where's their programme at the moment, where might it be going, where's their work at the moment, where might it be going. So you can kind of do a lot of desk research around that as well. But then when you get into the room and have that conversation, you want to dig down into that a little bit more and listen. So what you're trying to do is find that common ground. So I said there, for example, you know, why are you both in the location that you're in? You know, people find, we have conversations with people all the time. It's just about how we're having that conversation in that respect. So in that listening, you know, find out why, oh, sorry, can we just go, that's it, go back one. Why you're both in the location that you're in. That's a really good opener, you know, particularly if you're at an exhibition opening, for instance, in that respect. You know, it's kind of finding out why someone else is there and what your kind of connection might be to them in that respect. So you're trying to find that common ground that you've got. And then ask open questions, you know, find out about what it is that interests them, what they're working on currently. You know, it's kind of conversations that we automatically have as human beings naturally, but we don't consider them in this way, I think, quite often, is we're considering how we're listening in that conversation, looking for that relevance in that respect. So there's an element there about keeping the conversation going. So once you've kind of got that conversation started, picking up on the hot word, what we call the hot words that they are using, what they are interested in that respect, you know, what matters to them. And I think this is something that's really applicable to funding applications as well, in terms of, you know, or if you're applying for an opportunity, is really understanding the things that are really key to them. So what are those hot words? So in a scenario of where it's something that's written for you, it's kind of, I'm sure you all remember back to kind of, you know, the teachers at school kind of telling you when it comes to an exam sort of situation, you know, what are the key words that you're looking for? Go through, underline, you know, kind of highlight them, you know, that kind of aspect. How are you then fulfilling that criteria in that respect? Or how are you answering the question in that respect? And this is something that the sales world does all of the time in terms of listening out for those hot words that you use in a conversation. I don't know, you know, going into a car sales room, for instance, not that I am in a position where I ever go out and kind of buy a new car, but you know, what they're listening out for is you describing your kind of hot words as to what matters to you in that respect. And I think, you know, they're listening for, is it reliability? Do you need kind of a big car that kind of, you know, fits your, I don't know, family shopping in, you know, that respect? Because there's no point them then reflecting back in the conversation to you, the kind of speediest car they've got and the kind of, you know, sports car that they've got. It's about that kind of, you know, then talking to you about the car that's relevant to you in that respect. So it's easy in terms of the written word to be able to literally go through and then kind of underline, you know, those key words, but do that in a kind of conversation that you're in, you know, what's going on here? What are the hot words that are kind of being used? And then think about, you know, kind of how you fit, because what you're looking for is that fit, that your kind of relevance to that situation in that respect. So in terms of that conversation, you know, picking up on that hot words and then kind of continuing the conversation on that basis. So you then talk about the kind of common ground that you've got in terms of those hot words. And then in that conversation, kind of, you know, keeping it relevant to them, but don't interrogate them either. It's that kind of, you know, it's a conversation that you're having, but it's a conversation that you're trying to kind of steer in that respect because you're trying to find out information. And that point then, yeah, look for openers in the conversation as to how you and your work is relevant in the conversation. Talk about your work in a way that's relevant. So I've put there that adjust the dials. So that's kind of listening out for those hot words, and then how you talk about your work in that respect and adjust the dials accordingly. So kind of, this is going to be different to the different conversation. So kind of, oh, right. So if they're interested in this bit, or they're working on something that's kind of over here in that respect, then my dial around that needs to be amplified in this conversation. There's no point talking about something that kind of isn't quite so relevant to them. I'll turn that dial down. And until you've listened, you're not going to be tuned in to the kind of which dial needs to be turned up and which one needs to be turned down in that scenario. Does that make sense? And say it's kind of, we do this naturally in terms of conversations as well, but we're just not thinking about it in terms of how these conversations are being had in that respect, and looking for those opportunities. What I'd normally do in a kind of workshop environment is I get people to sort of practice some of this, to kind of put themselves in a kind of role play situation, which is always hugely amusing, you know, for people to kind of do that and sort of role play and kind of think that, you know, do something like they're at an opening, for instance, and then the kind of, you know, how they're having that conversation in that respect, and to tune in to those kind of hot words and then talk about, you know, their themselves and their work that's relevant to then that kind of conversation. Does anybody want to kind of talk about some of that? All silent. Oh, no, Lara. No, Melanie, sorry.
Hi, hi Mandy.
Hi.
Just I suppose thinking about, I have two heads often, so an artist head and a curatorial head, and I can see very much so about these kind of conversations about how you might put forward and think about the work you're already making and how it's relevant for somebody else. I'd be interested to hear what you think about also in terms of, you know, for us now in curators feeling very changed circumstances, or for the good in some ways, thinking about lots of cultural change that might happen, as well as kind of dire financial kind of economic scenes that we might be in. Like how this advice might apply to thinking about the audiences that we work with and looking to see what the shifted ground is now.
Yeah,
I'd be interested to hear if you think that these same principles apply, or if you had other ways of approaching. Yeah,
I think it does apply hugely at this point in time as well. And again, back to that kind of relevance, you know, what is it that's kind of going on and how are we responding to that then? So how do I adapt my skills, my project, my thinking to that situation now? And it's about that adjusting those dials again and kind of turning up the bits that are relevant and the bits that aren't quite so relevant, because there's no point kind of having a conversation about something that's now not going to be kind of, you know, an easy territory to be going forward with in that respect. So I think certainly, yeah, that kind of, you know, that go back to that kind of listening aspect and then responding in that respect is kind of, you know, what is that listening telling you that's kind of going on now? So we're talking about communities of people, as in participant communities of people, audiences in that respect.
Anyone that might be coming to a gallery at this point, and also I suppose the artists that we're working with, but mostly people who would be attending. Yeah,
so I think completely that kind of listening to them in terms of, you know, finding out what's going on and how you can then be kind of relevant to that. So, you know, what is it that the audiences want at this point in time? And you can do that by way of, you know, some organizations have actually gone out with surveys to sort of ask some certain question, some, you know, set of questions around certain aspects that they're thinking of responding to, like I did, you know, in terms of to you guys before we, you know, asking you to fill in that survey, because I wanted to make sure this this was relevant to you in that respect. So I wanted to respond. So I had an idea. So I set some questions around that and then asked you for your kind of feedback. And then I responded to those questions by kind of, these are where the things are that you want to talk about, and these are the things you don't want to talk about quite so much because they're not scoring, as being that relevant. So I then adjusted my thinking around what I could deliver that's relevant to you. I turned up the kind of dials on the things that you were responding, that was in that survey that I was responding to, and then turned down the things that obviously are not quite so relevant to you at this point. And I think also that's, in terms of audiences coming back through our doors, maybe we need to be listening as well to those kind of audiences and engaging in conversations, which is going to be a bit harder when you're going to have less people coming through the door, and also they're going to be kind of 2 meters apart as well. But I think as much of that as we can do as possible, the more we're going to know kind of what's, what the response is to that by way of meeting that common ground. So I think also, in terms of your clients as well, listening to your clients at this point in time, what's going on for them? What's the kind of, what are they having to then deal with going forward? Artists, again, kind of that you're working with, what's kind of going on? How can I then make these things relevant? Lara, you got your hand up.
Thank you.
Oh, so unmute, you got it.
Yes, sorry, I wasn't sure whether I was allowed to. Yeah, I've been thinking all the way through about the individual building their own partnerships as opposed to the requirements of the institution and the organisation. I was going to ask and comment on that a little bit earlier, but I didn't manage to get in soon enough. But in this particular case, talking about the specific audiences, when you're in a larger organisation like Mel works in and myself, with teams that are responsible, we have a whole team that's responsible for audience development. Although most people are furloughed at the moment, I have to say, still, I'm the only full-time member of my team who've worked throughout lockdown, so I'm feeling quite tired and quite exhausted of all the virtual, and I've done quite a lot of talking online and things, and I have lots of thinking around previous projects I've worked on as a freelancer, but it's actually quite hard in this particular situation as well, where we're not all meeting and the IT is quite poor within our organisation, to share our own findings from the artists we're working with and the projects we're working on, and the needs that we know of different kind of partners and audiences across the team, not least because they're not actually working. So I don't really know if there's an answer to this, but I just want to, I suppose I want some support, virtual support in this area, that it is actually quite a difficult position, because you get fitted into a relationship. On the one hand, I'm Arts Council funded, and the Arts Council kind of see me running the visual arts in Exeter and things, and then in the other hand, I'm within a quite kind of tight structure, even if it is only for a 4-year contract.
Yeah, okay. Can we pick that one up in the discussion in a minute? I just got one more slide that I want to just run through with you before we get into that kind of the depth there that you're talking about. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Nella, do you just want to flip us into the next slide, which hopefully is, yeah. So in terms of that kind of the relationship that you've got with a new client or a new organisation or a new artist that you're working with, that kind of, you're cultivating that kind of relationship. I just want to just quickly pick up on kind of keeping track of that in terms of where you are in, where am I in the relationship? My kind of pipeline as to kind of how we go from this kind of starting out the initial conversation to then it becoming kind of work. And I think that that point is, you know, keeping track of that conversation as to kind of where you are in that conversation in terms of, you know, you're establishing that kind of relevance, you're understanding what's going on for them. And just a point there, in the corporate world, this is quite often called customer relationship management, you know, sort of CRM, and that kind of, you know, just mapping that kind of process. So just keeping an eye on that kind of where you are in that conversation. So you've met, you've had an initial, you know, kind of conversation about the potential common ground, and then it's kind of how that conversation moves on. And I've got a gardening analogy I kind of use here in this respect. You know, you're planting seeds and you've got to kind of maintain them. And there's an element of don't over garden. So just to unpick that a little bit more, there's a kind of, you know, you as those of you who are gardeners know that you kind of put seeds down. There's a certain element of what you do within that is in your control, but you need other elements to kind of, you know, come into play, literally the sun and the rain in that respect, to kind of make that ground fertile. So sometimes that's the kind of where the opportunity, you know, the kind of context of the situation needs to be right in that respect. And then that kind of, sometimes you just have to stand back and let things happen for a little bit of time in terms of the right time frame, circumstances within that. And then that kind of don't over garden, don't pursue things too much, don't stand watching something, you know, you've got to give a bit of breathing space and a little bit of kind of time for things to sort of filter through and kind of the other stars to align in effect in that respect. And then that kind of, you know, just two more points there. They're kind of what it is that you're, the value that you're adding to them. So kind of understanding your values. Again, that's kind of relevance. And again, it's about that kind of understanding what you're bringing to that conversation, and kind of anything you can do. Sometimes, you know, you meet people and you have a kind of conversation and you say, oh, have you read this article? Or have you kind of, you know, the more you can kind of bring those things and kind of connect with people over those things, you know, follow up with the kind of, oh, I'll send you a link to that, or I'll send you, they start seeing you as kind of being relevant to them. And it's just a way of kind of continuing the conversation as well. And then there's just that kind of point of when to make the ask. So when you kind of do turn that into a project or a piece of work, or, you know, kind of what it is that you're trying to get to in that point, is that kind of, you know, start with the small and easy asks within that. And then kind of, you know, where do you see the opportunity? Or actually, is the opportunity kind of presented? Is it a sort of open process in that respect? But you've done all that kind of groundwork already, and you've kind of, you know, they can see how you're relevant, you've listened, you're responsive in that respect. So then you kind of, you'll know when the point is right to try and the worst thing that's going to happen in that is there's going to be a no, basically. And you've got to kind of judge when you feel it's in the place for a no to come back, and kind of, you know, how you then move on from that kind of no in that respect. You know, I'm sure you've all had this where you've applied for job opportunities or funding situations, or kind of, you know, and you get a no, but then sometimes what happens within that is it's the circumstances, to go back to that kind of seed growing, isn't quite right at that point of time. But like we know with seed, again, gardeners with kind of seeds, you know, sometimes that seed lies fallow for a little while and then it sprouts the next year, you know, when the I don't know, it's had more sun or more sunshine, or things are kind of aligned a little bit more in that respect. But that's about taking that risk and kind of understanding that it's okay to sometimes get a no, and it might not be right at this point in time, but it might be right further on down the line. So that's kind of what I've got by way of slides. Paula, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to sort of kind of pick up on Lara's point around so the sort of kind of debate that I want to hold as a curator is very, I'd say, quite political, and very much comes from a kind of social and ethical kind of basis. And I get to the point, well, there's just one instance at the moment where I've had not necessarily a no, it's more of a kind of, this conversation has to happen behind closed doors before it, it can kind of come out into the public realm. And actually it's the one in Bristol that's currently happening at the moment. And you kind of, I've knocked on the door to the council and they've just kind of closed the door. And I feel slightly as a network, we can open that conversation for them and hold a discussion around statues and the value of statues, or the lack of value in statues, really, public art. And now something's kind of turned into a situation where an artist is, I'm going to just quickly, taken the opportunity and done exactly what perhaps an artist should be doing in this time. And then, on the other side, now the art world is kind of criticizing that, because actually it should be asking the question, around the public space, and the public debate should be the city and people to kind of answer that point. I suppose it's just my frustration in relation to kind of like, always just listening to people kind of hold those conversations, and as known in our kind of gatekeeper world, as a freelancer, as a curator that wants to be, feel like it's in me to be entirely political with the work I do now. How you turn that into a yes is kind of what I want to do.
Yeah.
And then how I can maintain my frustrations around the fact that, I know the debate needs to be had, and it needs to be done immediately than held behind closed doors.
Yeah. I think sometimes I think when you can see that something needs to happen and it's not kind of happening, in that respect, is to kind of understand, to go back to that kind of how you're having the conversation element and the listening element and the hot words. So what is it then that's kind of relevant to them in that respect that would kind of be able to get that kind of opener? And how can I then make what I'm wanting to talk about in that relevant in that context? So coming at it from a different angle in terms of, if they want to talk about this and not that actual thing that I'm talking about here, then kind of how can I position what I want to talk about in a different way that then becomes relevant to them in that conversation? So it's kind of what are their motivators and their kind of hot words then, and how might this then fit that?
There is something about also, I feel, about kind of reacting to that gatekeeper situation and just getting on and doing it, because in fact, actually that feels a lot more proactive position to be in than kind of having to kind of listen and respond in relation to their context and situation. That's something I'm thinking about at the moment.
Sorry, I missed the button.
Laura as well.
Just in response to what you were saying, Paula, I've just read about that just before I came on, and I thought it was really interesting. And I'm wondering if there's a way that you could invite other people who actually work in the public realm and know these things quite well, and have a Zoom meeting together, record it, and then share that with the council and invite them to come to another meeting. That work? You're mute.
That's a great idea. See, this is what I mean.
Yeah. Great.
That is a really good idea. I was going to talk about something like that, but also I agree that you should just start making it happen. So conversely, although I feel limited in some ways in my work, I've also just got on with things because there isn't anybody to ask. So actually, I have just behaved like I am freelance and running the projects that I used to set up and things. So in some ways, I have just been really responsive and being able to get on with things. So I would say yes, that is a really excellent idea. And I look forward to. All I've read is the Guardian article and heard Mark Quinn's comments. So that's a very interesting debate.
Yeah, I think sometimes within that as well, you can kind of turn it so that they feel like it was their idea eventually as well, that they always wanted that to happen. And that's the kind of skill of, I think, the kind of approach in terms of that conversation and that kind of, again, that sort of relevance again. So it's kind of like if you've got to a point where you've had to sort of take action, you can almost kind of, yeah, get them again understanding that kind of, you know, how they respond and how their buy-in happens in that respect, just kind of flip it. Anybody got anything to add or more to that? Zoe?
Just a new question. Is that okay? New question is, like, you often working as a freelancer, you bring in knowledge and people into working with the organizations, and then eventually the organizations kind of overtaking it, so hijacking it basically. So it's a change in the nature of what it is, and then how you're taking in control, because there's many occasions I come across that, and then yeah, it's quite frustrating. It's a continuous battle when you're working with an institution. So how can you deal with it as a kind of freelancer?
Prudence.
I take on what you're saying, and now that I'm much older, I care less about ownership and more about getting it out there, if that makes sense.
Vicky?
First of all, I'm sorry if you can hear my neighbours banging out the music really loud, which has just kicked off. But I'd kind of counteract what you were saying, Prudence, about just wanting to get it out there, because in the climate of work opportunities are changing, we're all looking at loss of income, it becomes really important to make sure that you're building your own profile to be able to secure that work. And something I've observed in the past is actually that generally men are better at doing that than women, and that men will really proudly put curated by, so, you know, put their name on something, whereas women often won't. And I wonder if, as women curators, we need to get better at doing that and taking the credit and making sure that that's attributed correctly.
Yeah.
Lara, you're waving on that one.
Sorry, I've got problems with my microphone. Yeah, I agree with you, Vicky. And also, institutions have particular policies, and it can be quite hard when you first start working with them to ask. Like, I was freelance originally when I moved to Exeter, and I was part-time director of Exeter Culture, and so then I was freelance on the other 2 days a week. And I did a project with Bedder Williams, which, you know, I curated and set up and invited and, you know, did all the work around them. But because it was for the institution, nowhere did it say curated by me, or my name was not mentioned at all, which, you know, subsequently it's fine because I now work there. But at the time I was trying to build some work in the southwest because all my networks were up north, and I hadn't really, well, I had come across it in other places, but generally I suppose I'd worked that out a bit beforehand. And I agree with Vicky. My experience has been that I've never asked, and then a man 6 months later has managed to get his name on everything, and I don't know how they've managed it. But I started to ask more because I knew people in Yorkshire, and they'd asked me to go back, and I'd worked a lot in Hull, so it was an easier ask. But moving to the southwest, I didn't feel like I could ask the institution at that point. And even though I sent back a panel, I wrote the panel and had on the bottom curated by independent art curator and whatever, they took that off. So I don't know what you do about that. And obviously within the institution, even when you curate a whole exhibition and it is your idea and your concept and everything, nowhere will it say that it is curated by, unlike the Tate. It will say on panels and things around the institution, which I think is actually really helpful for the public, because then they know who to contact. But you know, there is a kind of policy around this, I've found in regional museums.
Yeah, I agree.
Paula, I think Paula, and then Melanie, and then Penny.
It might be worth just pointing them to the original perspective on why you would authorise a panel. That was Ivona Blaswick's agenda when she was at Tate. Yes, you know about this, and it really is about authorship and that relationship between ideas and imagination and narrative. So I wouldn't. I mean, it feels a lack of creative kind of understanding to not include, you know, an authorship of someone.
And in fact, if I can just interject, that may, I don't know if that's your experience, Laura, but that may lead on to other things like who takes the VIP around the exhibition, you know, who takes the kind of intellectual ownership of that exhibition within the institution. And if the institution doesn't have that culture of authorship, then maybe that, you know, it bleeds into other areas, you know, whereas when the institution does behave like that, those structures are quite clear, and there's a kind of respect for the role of the curator, I think.
Yeah, I've had the discussion absolutely on the need is not, you know, trying to putting my ego aside, just, you know, that my colleagues is, and then it's really helpful to know that Shelley works with us, who's an expert in lace, and, you know, that it's really important that, you know, the lace exhibition is curated by her.
I mean, it's the thing, it's a question about audiences, isn't it?
That's what
understanding.
I think also that kind of, you know, why the institution is working with you in the first place, you know, why are they working with an independent? Again, that kind of, you know, what is it that you're bringing to the table? What is it they're wanting to achieve by working with someone that's independent? And so that kind of then needs to be in the foreground in that respect as well. You know, is it that they wanted that partnership? Is it that they wanted that skill set? Is it they wanted that knowledge that you brought? So then it's got to be acknowledged in that respect, because there was a reason why they were doing it and why they weren't doing it in-house in that respect.
Oh, that's just because they were disorganised and haven't needed to recruit someone, and so they have lots of policies. So they advertised for a freelance position, I think, before they could advertise for and they were waiting for Arts Council funding. So I think mostly it's all about a kind of reactive organisational structure, and it's to do with the council, and it's kind of multi-layered. Yeah.
I think we had Melanie and Penny, and then I think I saw Prudence again in that respect.
I guess I'm just agreeing. I think it is really good. We started to do it more at Takes and Eyes to put the curator's name there. I think it's right from an audience's point of view that you associate a particular person. And then two other things. I think it's also a balance, like in terms of being an individual and being an individual in an organisation. There may have been choices made that actually weren't your choices. So that's maybe one thing. It's just another layer to it. And then I happen to work in learning, and we're not very good at that. We don't normally name who might have initiated something. And interestingly, I think perhaps normally we think that's good. So yeah, just to add that into another complication. But generally, I think it's good to name. And I think with everything going through a process of rewriting, especially interpretation that's so badly outdated, it's kind of good just to break it down from one gallery voice, as though that were the only way to interpret something. That's all.
And I got Penny.
Just kind of agreeing again, but I totally and utterly understand Lara's perspective. I used to work at RAM, so I get that as well. But but I'm in an institution actually which isn't Southwest, but our voice has just changed. So we used to be able to, I'm not freelance there, but I do bring in freelancers a lot. And we aren't allowed now, only as of the last 6 months, to put our names on anything. But I've been there 9 years, and I have for 9 years put my name on every exhibition, every commission, every production I've done. So I'm having to flip round entirely at the moment. So I am 100% fighting the cause whilst on furlough for this, and particularly because we're bringing in a lot of freelancers, a lot of academics who are co-curating with me, and I think they deserve the right for their voice to be shown. Not, I mean, it's heard through what we produce, but it's that kind of being proud of working with someone else and that different view and that different perspective, which I don't think as a industry we're very good at as a whole. And the other thing actually, which is I think relevant, but apologies if it's not, that I think there's a bigger thing within this about not rules as such, but a kind of network of us being together to fight things like this. And I'm not saying women only either, but it's more just we as organisations and freelancers both should be doing this together. So, I mean, Lara's in a similar position to me, and I can be here as your mentor. We can mentor each other on that one. But actually, as a voice for 20 of us here, we could actually, I don't know, or nationally fight things like this as well. So I just kind of wanted to say, let's try and work on these little things. They're minor to a lot of people, but big to us. And there's so much other bigger things we can actually do together, just as.
And to just quickly I suppose park to a certain extent, flag and park, but I kind of think something about this forum in terms of your peer network and peer support and discussion forum in that respect, and the support you can offer each other is really kind of key, flagging it for Paula and kind of Nella here as well. So that kind of parking it and flagging it as a forum in the future and support network. I think Prudence, you had something. Oh, you're on mute. No, you're still on mute. Shall I unmute you? Oh, I can't unmute you. That's it. You're on mute.
Okay, so it was just to agree with everybody, and I've had quite a lot of experience of you talked, Mandy, earlier about skill sets, and if you do have those skill sets where you are facilitator, fundraiser, came up with the concept, everything, then people tend to gravitate towards you and you all work as a team, but then it can be taken away from you. So I really do understand, and I think it's a good idea to get the terminology right. So in fact, this doesn't happen. There should be some blanket sort of system where the names get sorted out. And as far as men go, yeah, I work with women and we collaborate together, but often I'll take a lead, but they can appreciate, it's the skill sets thing again. So it's a grace, isn't it?
And I think there's lots of, in the corporate world, there's lots of evidence around, that kind of how males ask for pay rises and women don't as much. And so therefore there's kind of that, the confidence level is different to a certain extent. I can see we have got, a couple of males in the room here as well in this respect. But also that kind of, in responding to a job description as well, when applying for jobs as well, there is a difference in terms of that level of confidence in terms of how they respond, whether they click or they can tick all of the sort of criteria or not in that respect, and women do that again differently. And again, that's a kind of generalization, but actually there's lots of evidence around kind of that, and it's about that level of confidence actually as well. Have we got any other points that people wanted to bring up? Vicky?
Yeah, it's a question, but not a question, just a sort of conversation topic, really. When you were talking about relevance, it's kind of got me thinking a bit about like the timelines that we have to work with, particularly with needing to fundraise for so many projects. Like, I feel it's a really important part of my kind of working process, both independently and within an institution, to consult with audiences and really think about the kinds of projects that reflect their interests. But to do that, to fundraise for a project, it can take so long before that project finally, or an exhibition finally appears. And now I feel like that's going to be an even bigger, an even longer time, because things that I had lined up before lockdown are now knocked back, in some cases by a full 12 months. And I'm just seeing that this is going to mean that things are taking longer and longer, and that fundraising is more and more competitive. So we're writing endless funding bids that are getting knocked back. And I just wonder if other people are having similar experiences, or whether they've got strategies for dealing with this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Paula?
So I know, Vicky, obviously you work for an organisation as well, but with your independent work, the Arts Council are really flagging up the opportunity for independent practitioners to apply, and then how our work can be supported. And I suppose I'm seeing it as an opportunity to be able to develop that touring exhibition that I've been thinking about for a very long time, and the work that I'm researching at the moment. So as an independent, perhaps at the moment, I see that there's going to be a greater opportunity coming our way in a sense of Arts Council funding than there ever has been before. And that I think there's got to be a way to be able to kind of think more collectively about these applications as well, and to have those structures around those support mechanisms to think really collectively about making that ask together. That I suppose the one thing that I will I hope will happen is that organisations, institutions actually going to lend and to think about us more in the forthcoming couple of years, because their finance models are going to change, and actually there's going to be a need to be able to kind of find ways to curate exhibitions in different ways, but also the artists who live directly more immediately in the space, especially given the fact that majority of organisations are at the moment going to be zombie for a while, because audiences aren't feeling confident about going into them. There's got to be a new way to activate those spaces and build the narrative for artists and curators to be able to build the narrative of the place that they live in as well. That's my feeling. That's what I would like to see. And it feels like there is a kind of a real shift in kind of that leveling up in the conversations that are having kind of, nationally, and also, within the region as well. But it takes us to do that work, is my feeling. It takes us to kind of push that work forward collectively, which is kind of hence wanting to kind of bring people together to sort of inspire that change in that way.
I think certainly a discussion that I had with Arts Council Wales last week, and I know England are having this discussion as well, is that kind of, yes, there is going to be a slowdown within organisations and a reduction down to how many shows they do a year, which is going to have an impact upon independent curators and artists as well. That's something that might have even been lined up for next year, might not now be in 2021, it might be 2022. So they're kind of very aware of that situation. And then kind of the Arts Council England are going to come out with their new funds on the 22nd, new project grants, the 22nd of July, I think is the date. They have talked about already how they're going to kind of start prioritizing those that have had the COVID impact, you know, hugely within that, by way of kind of independents and artists in that context, rather than kind of organizations. But I think there's something about, Paula was saying, that collective voice actually kind of coming together to kind of make that point, because you can't do it on your own individually. You can't make that kind of point back to you know, kind of Arts Council and to institutions in that respect. It needs that collective aspect. I see a hand. Melanie.
I'm not sure where we're finishing, but I'm going to make this quick anyway. So just something to think about. So I've been a member of the union, one of the unions at Tate Prospect, for a number of years, and I'm now the rep, which is proving, you know, really helpful, and we've been able to be vocal on some recent things. So just to raise that, like, Prospect accept, you know, you can be an independent and be part of the union, and there's just a whole other line of communication in terms of supporting workers and rights. Yeah, just thought I'd bring that up in case anyone was thinking about it. It's really affordable if you're part-time. I think it's like $128 a month or something, and they're just a really good resource and another way of having a collective voice. So
I think I saw, I've got a couple of hands. Rosa, Zoe and Paula.
I think Jack raised a hand earlier as well.
Sorry, Jack, sorry. It's Jack first.
Yeah.
Jack, Rosa, Zoe, were you just pointing out Jack?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
So Jack, Rosa, Paula.
Sorry. I was just going to say, like my experience with trying to be more sort of relevant during the COVID time, because we don't have a space anymore, so we're not kind of like constricted by these kind of time restraints, and you know, starting to work more on radio and podcast projects where they're a bit more kind of like I don't know, like a lighter touch, I guess, to sort of that kind of curating projects, which has been really interesting, and a lot more kind of like reaching out as well to different people. So a lot of different disciplines that we've been kind of like connecting and talking with. But it's made me think a lot about the projects that we want to do in the future as well. And less, I guess, like, you know, previously we were trying to do, you know, quite ambitious group or solo projects that would be on for like a month or 6 weeks or something, that but now, I don't know, I feel like we'll be working towards those kind of projects less, and thinking more about those kind of projects that just are a bit lighter, a bit more kind of responsive to things that are happening, say, in that month, or, you know, while we're kind of collaborating with an artist. I know that's not possible in like you know, a bigger organization, but just in a kind of more grassroots project approach, it feels like, yeah, it's working really well.
So are you thinking that's going to be a kind of more rapid sort of turnover of things happening then, of activity in response to that respect? Yeah. Okay, yeah, which maybe, you know, kind of one of the advantages is that you're more kind of fleet of foot in that respect, outside of a kind of an institution that has to program things well in advance.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Paul has put up the Artists Union as well, a link to that. I think we are over time, but I think what it's shown, our kind of extended discussion, is that, you know, how useful it is to come together as a sort of peer network, certainly, to, you know, to sort of support each other and have that forum to be able to kind of have a discussion, really. And I don't know how many of you knew each other sort of prior to this, but maybe that's something that, you know, that kind of linking up and having conversations on a more regular basis could sort of come out of this, maybe.
It's great. Thank you, Mandy. And thank you, Nella, also for being behind the scenes and doing all the technical aspects. So yes, please, from Vicky's, that's brilliant. Peer network from Lara. I think just, you know, being able to have those general conversations about what you're doing, what I'm doing, would be incredibly helpful. Just even Carolyn kind of pointing out, you know, a way to think around it. So Nella and I will work on that. And but yeah, just even if it's, you know, every couple of months to kind of really check in or find a way, but we could just open up the conversation to you guys to see how you want to start it going, and what would be of use. We could probably do that over email as well, easily enough. But thank you so much. Thank you to Mandy. That was brilliant. You've kind of just got me right. I've got my stakeholder map here now.
Good.
Definitely. And lots of love to everyone. And hopefully people are getting a good break in there. I know I'm determined in August to have a break, definitely. And Vicky's like, no. Relentless. It is, isn't it? It's mad.
And thank you to everyone as well. It's been, you know, really useful to hear your, you know, kind of what you're working on and where you're kind of finding sticky points and kind of what matters to you as well. It's a really useful, you know, kind of, for me as much as kind of you in that respect, to hear what problems are for other people and what you need to work on.
Yeah, definitely. Well, take care, and we'll definitely see you all soon. I think, Nelly, you're going to leave it open. Is that correct? Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.